Hey, yo, what's up, everybody? It's me, Joey P, Joe Pizzapia, and welcome to Fantasy Pros, the home of fantasy sports. It is me, it is Mike Tagliere, it is Kyle Yates, and it's you. And we're talking free agency today. Yes, finally, we've gotten all the big names to land where they're supposed to be, and we're going to break it all down fantasy style for you today on the show. Talk about where they are, what the impact is, the good, the bad, and the winners and losers at the end of the day from NFL free agency. And there always are winners and losers, or at least perceived ones. So gentlemen, welcome to the program today. Tags, you and I spent a good 2 hours waiting for some big names to drop during our live stream. And I think we did a very good job of continuing to talk despite the big names not being there. And then I felt really bad as I watched things like NFL Network, where they went on for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours after us and continued to not have anything to talk about. So we got off easy, I think, looking back in retrospect.
I mean, when you talk about 2 hours, yeah, but we don't have commercial breaks. We just keep talking. We talk through it, and a little behind the scenes stuff. Every time that you open up the show and you do the whole, hey, yo, Yates, our video guy, Chris, they both told us like that this is totally behind the scenes stuff, where Joe, they told Joe, if I hear that again, it's like it's happening in my nightmares. I'm waking up to hearing Joey P
That's
say,
where
hey,
I
yo.
want to live. I want to live inside your head. I want to live inside your dreams. This is why they brought me in, because you just got to come back for more. And look, man, I'm excited. I want to get going here. And Yates, I'm sorry if some of my, very strong Brooklyn Italian energy is too much for you sometimes, and you hear it in your sleep. But you know what? I think it's good. I think it brings you out of your shell a little bit. And I want to say this, too. You already did a little version of this on the Dynasty podcast, so make sure if you missed it, you could check out Kyle's recap with Ray about the Dynasty implications of all these free agent signings. So are you ready to talk now about the redraft? And importantly, Ayo, are you ready?
Well, I was about to say that if there were two people on this planet that could talk for 2 hours nonstop, it would be you two. So
yes,
they picked correctly to have on that live stream. So, but no, I'm ready to talk some free agents. Happy to be here with you guys.
Now, Joe, real quick, did you know? Here's a fun fact. If you guys
I love fun facts.
If you're new to the show, and if you weren't here for the NFL draft last year when we did the live stream and did that whole thing, Yates had to stop mid-show and go to the bathroom. He had to go pee-pee. So he was not able to pull a Scott.
Did you say pee-pee? I just want to make sure.
He has a young child.
Yeah, okay. All right, that is fair. You are okay, continue on. I just want to make sure we've established.
It's what we're used to. Come on. But so Yates had to go. So he was no Scott Hansen. Are you, when we do the NFL live stream this year, are you going to be able to make it through without a bathroom break?
That is an important question. The problem is I drink too much water. So
Thank you.
I'm like one of those water guys where I got the water all day, and then by the evening it backs up. But I'll have a plan in place. I'll figure it out. If anything, maybe I'll just pick it up and we'll walk here. As I said, I do the show on a laptop, so maybe that'll be easier. We don't stop.
There's the line.
No,
there's the line. We found the line.
Oh, we found the line. All right, so we found the line. We're gonna go past it, and that's just what we do. But look, before we get into things here, I want to make sure we let everybody know too about the giveaway that's still going on here. Free Lamar Jackson autographed jersey, thanks to our friends at pristineauction.com. Head over to fantasypros.com/contest, and you can get involved in this. Did I mention it's free? Because it's free to get involved and entered. All you got to do is leave a stunning review of how much you love myself and Mike Tagliere and how much you tolerate Kyle Yates, and make sure you go to Apple Podcasts and CastBox in order to get that little review in. You take a screenshot, you go back to fantasypros.com/contest, you fill out the form, boom, you upload the screenshot, pow! Next thing you know, Lamar Jackson, you are entered to win that jersey. Again, pristineauction.com is the one who's bringing it all to you, and we're going to bring to you the winners and the losers, and don't get caught on the wrong side of that line. That's an old Bruce Springsteen tune called Atlantic City, and Kyle, I want you to go back and do some homework on that. It's a great tune.
Okay. All right,
I think you'll like it. I think it's a good one. It's old Bruce. It's pre Born in the USA Bruce, pre sellout. This is like old school, like he's still a real kind of beatnik artist kind of guy. I think that's something up your alley. You should go check that out. In the meantime, let's start with the biggest name of all. It's Kenny Golladay, because we've been waiting, and finally he did indeed sign a 4-year, $72 million deal with the New York Giants, $40 million guaranteed. So, Yates, let's start with you on this one. Kenny Golladay, obviously the upside is there. We know he's capable of being a wide receiver one. The question is this a good move for the Giants, and is this a good move for the fantasy value of Kenny Golladay?
Well, those are two separate questions because if you
That's
want to
why I
talk
asked
about
them separately.
the fantasy value of Daniel Jones specifically, this is good news. This is more so about Daniel Jones and what he can do and surrounding him with the talent. Now, you look at this offense, you have Kenny Golladay, Darius Slayton, Sterling Shepard, Evan Engram, Kyle Rudolph, Saquon Barkley out of the backfield with Devontae Booker, too. So I think looking at that is a surrounding cast that Daniel Jones needs to be successful. Now it's all going to be up to him, kind of like Drew Lock last year. Now it's all going to be up to him to see if he can take that next step forward. As far as Kenny Golladay, like this really didn't move him a ton in my overall 2021 draft rankings. Like it really didn't. I still think that he is a high-end wide receiver 2 for me, someone who is going to have to compete with a bunch of other mouths in this offense, to feed. And so I think he can still get those, 6 targets per game. And he, of course, can bring in anything that's within his catch radius. But I think it all just now comes down to Daniel Jones and what he can do for Kenny Golladay specifically heading into next year.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the Drew Lock thing because there was a narrative building last year about Drew Lock being almost too big to fail, right? Like all the surrounding things, the pieces are so good. How could he not be halfway decent? And I think we all know the answer to that question. So, Tags, when you look at this now and you see Kenny Golladay in the same situation for Daniel Jones, are fantasy owners setting themselves up for failure not only with Golladay being there, but also potentially with Daniel Jones as well, where they think, wow, this really boosts his value as a maybe a really solid superflex QB2, but at the same time, we've seen injuries to Saquon Barkley, and we've seen injuries to Kenny Golladay, and we've seen some inconsistent play, and certainly the turnovers are very troubling when it comes to Jones.
So Jones, he threw 11 touchdowns in 14 games last year. In 2020 football, that's hard to do. I mean, it really is. The game is set up for you to be a successful passer in the NFL today, and it's why only a few quarterbacks in the league last year finished with more interceptions than they did touchdowns. So the fact that Daniel Jones is not being questioned, in New York as the starting quarterback, as the franchise quarterback, it kind of blows my mind, especially when they have a pick as high as they do in the top 12 this year, where it's like, they might have a chance to grab a quarterback, and me as a franchise, I might be considering it depending on who was there. But Daniel Jones, the biggest concern I have with Golladay isn't the fact that Daniel Jones will throw into tight coverage, because he does. He's actually, if you go through NFL's next gen stats, you can see that Daniel Jones is actually one of the more aggressive quarterbacks in terms of targeting his wide receivers in tight coverage, which is good because Golladay has been in the bottom 5 wide receivers in terms of yards of separation over the last 2 seasons. So Golladay isn't like the insane route runner that's going to generate tons of separation, that's going to give you a massive target, but when you throw a ball up to Kenny Golladay, it's more of a 60-40 than it is 50-50. He's great in contested catch situations, and that's part of the reason that he gets hurt as much as he does. He puts his body out there like he's a big guy, and when he gets hit awkwardly when he's going up for one of those contested catch situations by a safety or a cornerback coming down, he's going to suffer some injuries. Do I think this is a great landing spot for a fantasy? I don't. I was going through, and even if we were to dial back Sterling Shepard to 85 targets, Darius Slayton to 75 targets, we still have Evan Engram. We still have Kyle Rudolph, who's a red zone presence. He's not going to be a big target hog, but he's going to be a red zone presence. Saquon Barkley, I don't think people realize just how many targets that guy should get in the passing game. You have to be able to utilize him. And going last year, Daniel Jones threw the ball down the field just 9.6% of the time. It was one of the lowest rates in the NFL, which is the exact opposite of Matthew Stafford. So if you want Kenny Golladay to have value, you need those big catches, because he averaged like 18 yards per reception back in 2019 with Stafford. You need those big catches, or you need touchdowns, because I don't think he's a guy that's going to generate more than 110, 120 targets. So I have him as a middling wide receiver 2, maybe even a low-end wide receiver 2, depending on how you want to build your roster, because I do think he's going to be a stable, safe option that gets 7, maybe 8 targets per game, but he might not have the upside of some wide receivers that you're going to look at in that range.
All right, let's play a game then, because I like context, and I'm sure our listeners do too. So I'm going to give you some names in that range. You tell me who would you rather have, Golladay or this other guy. DJ Moore or Golladay?
Moore, 100%.
Yates, same thing. Okay,
Yes.
Cooper Kupp or Kenny Golladay?
They're in the same territory for me. I honestly, I
Well,
think
that's why I'm doing it.
I think-
They're just literally just set it up. They're in the same territory, so
Kupp-
now you got to choose one.
Kupp, I'm gonna go with Kupp. I think Kupp doesn't take as much projecting. He gets an upgrade at quarterback. I think I'll go with Kupp. I mean, it's close, but because they're in the same tier.
Kyle, you're shaking your head. You agree?
Yeah, I'm going to lean on the quarterback there. They are in the same tier, but I'm going to lean on the quarterback there and go with Matthew Stafford over Daniel Jones.
Last one, Adam Thielen. Yates, start with you on this one.
Oh, I might go Golladay there. That's super close. but I might go Golladay there.
How about you, Tax?
That's fair. That's fair because Thielen, 31, 32 years old now. He's getting up there in a run first offense.
That was my take also, was the age factor with Thielen now, and also Jefferson's emergence there, and I think that combination is enough for me to go Golladay instead. So this is important. I think this is why you got to have these conversations and flush this out, because when you say a range of a player, I think it's always important to start to look at what that range is and who those names are, and start to decide for yourselves how you feel as you're listening to the show here today, where you want to put Golladay in your rankings and your approach this year. And also, I want to give a shout out before we go any further to the news people here at Fantasy Pros. They've done such a phenomenal job here keeping up with all this stuff, and free agency has been a very long week or so of stuff. And the Fantasy News app by Fantasy Pros, if you don't have it already, you should get it, especially with the draft coming and especially with everything going on Major League Baseball right now too. There's so much going on in terms of news. So get the Fantasy News app, brought to you by Fantasy Pros, over obviously on the iTunes Store and Apple Store, and obviously on Google Play as well, because there's just so much going on right now, and it's the best way to kind of keep up. And they've done such a phenomenal job of keeping everybody informed on your device and continuing to get updated on who's going to land where and what's happening in all of sports. And speaking of landing spots, JuJu Smith-Schuster landed right back on a 1-year deal for $8 million with the Steelers. And Tags, I don't think this is... It's not shocking to me. I guess maybe the market just wasn't there. Maybe it's a combination of, JuJu really didn't want to go, and maybe they just said, you know what, let's try to reset here and go back for one more. Because if you look at JuJu's season, it was very good. The trouble is, I think it hasn't lived up to the expectations that you thought you were going to project for him a few years ago. But is that necessarily his fault? And is it a failure of JuJu Smith-Schuster, or more of a failure overall of the offense to kind of, move him forward into that elite tier in terms of the system they're running and the personnel they have?
I think it's more just understanding who JuJu Smith-Schuster is and who he isn't. And I think that you started to realize that he's just not that number one wide receiver. When Antonio Brown left, things went downhill quickly for him. And I think even starting this year, it was a little rough until Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool made a name for themselves. And all of a sudden, it's like, hey, JuJu is not the guy that we need to worry about anymore. And they kind of put him back in that slot role. He played that low yards per reception role over the middle of the field, and he can do that consistently well. He can beat those nickel corners. He can beat linebackers, safeties. He's good in that role. But if you try and project him as a number one receiver, put him on the perimeter, you're going to be severely disappointed. And I think that's ultimately what JuJu had to think about, because, teams were strapped with the salary cap right now. You had the Ravens, who were reportedly offered more money, and then he had to think, if I take a year deal with the Ravens, I'm not going to get a whole lot of targets there. I don't think I'm going to make myself a whole lot of money with Lamar Jackson. Apparently that the Chiefs were somewhat involved. I don't know if they actually made him an offer or not, and that would be something. They did. So that would have been a team that it kind of shocked me that he wouldn't have gone there, because they're a team that does move their wide receivers all over the place, a chance to play with Patrick Mahomes. But I think he stayed with a situation that's familiar with him, where he has Deontay Johnson, he has Chase Claypool, and it's like, hey, let me rack up some more yardage, get one more year with Ben and a win now team, and then from there I can go make some money in free agency, because I don't think he's going to be coming back to the Steelers. I think this is more of like, I know the system. I know I can succeed here. I know how I'm used, and it's kind of that, because Tyreek Hill is a guy, Travis Kelce, those are guys that play in the slot over 50% of the time. They're not going to slide those guys out just to have JuJu there. They're not going to do that.
Right, and I think it also gives them another year or two to prove to teams that any of the extracurricular social media stuff that people might think is a distraction or a problem, as long as he performs on the field, who cares what that is?
Right.
Yates, when you look at JuJu and his value, how do you stack him up in terms of the return on investment value when you look at the rest of the board of Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers, where they're going and who you think the best ROI is?
I don't have that ADP in front of me, so I'm going to assume that JuJu is farther down the list, because after averaging 8.6 yards per reception last year, even though he got a ton of targets, I don't think that he's going to be I don't think people are excited about him, right? I think Deontay Johnson still is going to be the best value heading into next season. Now, the overall question becomes, with Pittsburgh, what does the overall offense look like? Do they move forward next year and they take a ton of pressure off of Ben and they say, we have to get back to the ground game. We have to invest early in a running back. We talk about in the NFL draft, at that number 24 overall spot, does Najee Harris or Javonte Williams land there because of how they could fit in that scheme? So I think definitely getting back to the ground game, well, then that takes away the overall passing volume for JuJu. And if he's not going to be particularly efficient, well, then where's the value coming from? If the overall passing volume comes down, but he's not overly efficient with his opportunity, how is he going to produce? So I'm not necessarily super excited about JuJu. I would have been more excited, obviously, if he would have landed in Kansas City. But heading into next season, he's probably going to be one of those guys that, of course, I have to see where his ADP lands, but probably not going to have any shares of JuJu Smith-Schuster.
Just so you guys know, his ECR right now, I just pulled it up.
I had it all ready to go.
Oh, you did?
Go ahead. No, yeah, go ahead. Now you stole all my ECR thunder.
He's at wide receiver 30 right now in ECR, right in between DJ Chark and Tyler Boyd.
Probably have both of those guys over Juju.
I would agree with you on that one.
And then after that, the next two Steeler wide receivers are where? Where do you have Deontay Johnson?
21, Deontay Johnson's at 21, which I think is right around where he should be. There's upside for more there, but he's safe. And then Claypool's at 33. I think I might rather have Claypool, to be honest, just a chance at a breakout, because Juju's not going to break out. He's not going to have a 1,400-yard season.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I absolutely agree with that. Let's move on to the next one here, and that's Will Fuller. We'll do one more wide receiver here. Actually, while we're talking about it, and then we'll get back to some of the running backs too. Will Fuller goes from the Texans to the Dolphins. 1 year, $10 million deal. Yates, I like this for the Dolphins. I think this is nothing but upside here. I think it's a perfect opportunity here to bring in a player that had a very good season last year, has been relatively good in terms of productivity when he's been on the field. Injuries have always been his problem. Last year, we all know the PEDs at the end of the year. But I think when you're analyzing the situation with Will Fuller, from a cap standpoint, this makes a lot of sense. You can go in there, see if he's a fit with the culture you're trying to build, see if he has a productive season. And if he doesn't, well, you move on next year and you go figure out with somebody else. But if things do kind of gel, and I think we've done a couple mocks here where we've also had the Dolphins looking at some of the big-time wide receivers also. So it's almost like it's a no-lose situation here for them. So I feel like this was nobody really talked much about this, I feel like, going into the offseason. But it feels like this is a really good landing spot potentially for Will Fuller and for the Dolphins too, because of the lack of commitment.
There are two sides of it. One is Miami's side, and investing in a wide receiver with Will Fuller's talent and ability, especially to be able to create separation. That's the big thing. When you have Devontae Parker and Preston Williams, who are both contested catch guys, which is not Tua's strength, you need to be able to create that separation and give him those open windows. So I think it definitely makes sense when you take everything into account with how much he's costing. It's a 1 year kind of prove it deal. Let's see what you can do. Let's bring him in and build around Tua. Well, then the other side of it is the fantasy impact for Will Fuller specifically. And I'm actually not a huge fan of this signing for Will Fuller. There were other landing spots that I would have loved to see him land as far as capitalizing on his fantasy value. With Tua, he's one of those elite game managers, the guy who can get the ball out quick, let his playmakers create, and just do that with incredible accuracy and anticipation. Well, Will Fuller is a deep threat. That is his game. He is not one of these guys who is utilized heavily underneath and be able to create with yards after the catch. Now, can he be that? I think so. I think he can round into that. But yet, when you're looking at Tua's strengths, he's going to keep things towards the line of scrimmage on that short to intermediate levels of the field. With Will Fuller, it's going to open up the offense. It's going to have a dramatic impact for the other players in this offense. But yet, with his ability to keep defenses on their heels, but yet I don't think that he's going to see more than those 2 to 3 targets deep downfield per game, and that's just not going to be enough for me to invest in Will Fuller for fantasy purposes.
Tags, are you in alignment here with Yates about this, which is it's not a good move necessarily for his fantasy value, but a good move maybe perhaps for the Dolphins as a team?
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how they use him, just because you think about Devontae Parker, he's going to be on the field, and then Preston Williams, when he's been on the field, he's actually flashed a little bit, played well, but none of these guys play in the slot, and you're not going to put Will Fuller in the slot. That's just not where he's going to play. So I'm really interested to see what they're going to do here. There's some people saying that they could still take a wide receiver. They're at 3. I don't know if that's going to happen anymore, but I was looking at it. There have been 20 games in Will Fuller's career he's played without Deshaun Watson. In those 20 games, he's only averaged half of a target less. So he goes from 6.5 targets with Watson down to 6 targets without him. That half a target is in terms of efficiency, he's averaged 32 fewer yards, half of a touchdown less. So with Watson in the lineup, PPR points per game, 15.5 points per game. Without him, 7.5. And again, the difference is a half of a target. That's all we're talking about. So am I going to say that Tua Tagovailoa is the same as TJ Yates, Tom Savage, and Brock Osweiler? No, I'm not. But what I will say is that in 2020, Tua Tagovailoa did not support fantasy relevant wide receivers. I went through it and I looked at it. The 9 games that Tagovailoa started, where he played the majority of the game, There were just 5 occasions all year where a wide receiver finished with more than 9.4 half PPR points, and none of them finished with more than 15.1 points. So therefore, Ryan Fitzpatrick pumped those receivers up a little bit, whereas Tua brought them back down. So it's like you start adding in all these pieces that they have on the field. Mike Gesicki, are they going to draft a running back that can catch some more passes out of the backfield? Kenyan Drake or Myles Gaskin can obviously do that. So I don't love it from a fantasy perspective. I'm with Yates in this one, where I think that he's more of like a wide receiver 3 that you can kind of take and deal with the ups and downs because he's going to have some of those explosions. But I just don't trust Tua quite yet to draft Will Fuller as anything more than like a low-end wide receiver 3.
Yates, earlier when you talked about how, Mike is like an expert talker, like you could just wind him up for 6 hours and just let him go. Do you know why he's so good at that? I'll tell you why. It's because he interviews himself a lot. I don't know if you ever noticed this. Like Mike will ask himself, does Mike Tagliere like this guy? He does. Does he think long term? Perhaps. Will he come back and do this again later on? And that is something, and I love that. But you wanted to know why he can go on forever? Because he can interview himself, and that's a tough skill. That's something you need a lot of energy for. And sometimes when you're looking for a little energy, you want a little magic spoon. And guess what? I had a little magic spoon yesterday, and it's one of the healthy breakfast cereals that's changing how we kind of have breakfast. But guess what? I had it for lunch yesterday, and you know what happened? I was too busy. I was talking all day, just like Tags is all the time, talking all the time. And I just missed lunch. I didn't have lunch. And I said, I've got the magic spoon. And I went over there, and I poured myself a bowl of the Cocoa Magic Spoon, and I had that. And then I went out on a bike ride with my kids in the afternoon. I didn't feel hungry. I was great. So you should get involved with the Magic Spoon too. 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein. It's like a big, beautiful bowl of protein. They got some fantastic different flavors there. They got the cocoa. They got the fruity one. They've got the frosted, which is also quite good. And the peanut butter. You can take the peanut butter and the cocoa. You mix them together. It's unbelievable. It's only 140 calories per serving. It's keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, low-carb, GMO-free. All the things that Yates thinks are very important. He's very careful about what he puts into his body. His body is a temple, as all of you should take a good lesson from Yates as well as that. So look, right now you can go to magicspoon.com and you can get involved as well. So go to magicspoon.com/fantasypros to grab the new limited edition cookies and cream, maple waffle, or customize a bundle of cereal to try today. And be sure to use the promo code FANTASYPROS at checkout and save $5 off your order. So this offer is good now anywhere in the United States or Canada, but only when you use our code at checkout. So once again, go to magicspoon.com/fantasypros and get in there today. I'm telling you, true story. This is the life of Joey P, and I'm able to kind of share that on the show because, we're not going to be trying to push things on there if we don't believe in them. And I'm in on the Magic Spoon. Did you have any Magic Spoon yesterday, Tags?
I didn't. I've been trying to avoid breakfast. I'm going on vacation, and I'm trying to just make sure I don't eat a whole lot before I do that.
Trying to avoid breakfast. That's the most... Yates, would you recommend that? You're the body is a temple guy. Do you believe that? I don't know why I've put that moniker on you now. Like everyone's picturing you like doing yoga in the mornings and having your meditation time and stuff like that. But you eat breakfast in the morning, right?
I actually don't. But when I do want some breakfast in the morning, I'm going Magic Spoon. That is for sure.
All right. Well, I eat breakfast. I got 2 kids I got to make breakfast for every morning. So, yeah, you're eating breakfast because if you don't, you might not eat again, as I said earlier. So let's get into some more wide receivers. We actually do have one more to talk about, and it's Curtis Samuel gets reunited with his old teammate on the other side of the ball here. He's going to be with the football team, hopefully for the next 3 years, $34.5 million for him. So, Tags, let's start with you with this one. Panthers lose a piece here in Curtis Samuel, who it felt like last year things towards the second half of the season were really starting to click for him and things were going well. Now, the question is, can we carry that good feeling over into this new offense for him and this new team? Or is this like a reset and we really kind of have to sit back and wait and see?
I mean, are Matt Rule and Joe Brady going with him?
I'm going to say no. No, actually, they are not going with him.
I want to know why the entire fantasy football community is like so gaga over Curtis Samuel right now. I mean, I understand he played really well in 2020, but I'm talking about the move in general. Everybody's like, Washington's going to be electric. You got this and this and this.
Well, I mean, they have upgraded their quarterback from nothing to something.
You still have the same exact play caller.
And Yates is laughing because the bar is low. Granted, right. The bar has been very low, but it is better. So I guess that's part of it. But he also fits that highlight reel player that everybody loves. For sure. You get a clip of him on Twitter and you go, oh, look at him. He's so so great. Oh, if only.
If only he had a different offensive coordinator, because Scott Turner is the coordinator that's in Washington and Ron Rivera is the head coach. This is the same exact duo that used him in 2019 as the wrong wide receiver. I can show this to you, Joe. All right, so Curtis Samuel in 2020.
Fired up.
He played in the slot 72% of the time in 2020 under Matt Rule, okay? In 2019, that number was at 28%. That's a different player. Fundamentally, you're using him as a different player. In 2020, he averaged 7.1 air yards per target, close to the line of scrimmage. That's one of the lower numbers in the league. In 2019, 14.5 air yards per target. He was being targeted as a downfield wide receiver. That was one of the higher marks in the league. His yards after contact was almost double in 2020 because they were using him in the correct fashion. Now, to be fair, Scott Turner now does have an NFL sample of Curtis Samuel to say, hey, this is how the hell you use this guy. My concern is that Washington, you have Terry McLaurin there.
Right.
You really don't have another perimeter receiver unless they believe in Kelvin Harmon or they believe in Yates's guy. I'll let Yates talk about him. But I don't know if they're going to use him in that slot role. I want to see him used around the line of scrimmage. I want you to give him handoffs. We didn't see that. Everybody talked about last year. Oh, we can't wait to see Antonio Gibson using this hybrid role. Antonio Gibson was used like a 2-down running back all year long. J.D. McKissick took on that 3-down role. So stop talking about how we can't wait till how creative they are in offense. Scott Turner hasn't showed the ability to do that yet. So why should we believe that Curtis Samuel is going to be used differently now than he was in 2019 with the same damn coach? Curtis Samuel's a good football player, but you cannot just sit here and say, hey, chuck the ball down the field to him and expect him to be very, efficient with those targets, because that's just not who he is.
Is Tags frustrated by the opportunity?
Am I frustrated?
Yes. Yes. Is he cautiously optimistic? Maybe. Yates, if you could please bring the energy level up a little bit, because there's we're lacking a lot of passion here on the show right now. So if you could just kind of kick it up a notch and give me your take about Samuel, because it could also just be a player finally kind of, realizing himself and getting comfortable in the league. But everything that Tag said is clearly viable also. And it is kind of ironic that we are going backwards almost in time for him. And look, to Tags' point too, I was shocked that Joe Brady didn't get more attention possibly as a head coach, because I thought the play calling was spectacular last year. I thought he was top 3 play caller in the NFL last year. And every time I watched one of their games, it was just blatantly obvious. Like, it was not always the talent, it was the way things were being used and the situations that they were willing to make certain calls, and it was just terrific. But when you're looking at Curtis Samuel now, is this a trap? Because it seems like Tags is kind of setting it up like that's exactly what this is. Do you feel the same way? Or maybe Ryan Fitzpatrick is the kind of quarterback you can get more out of him in fantasy with?
I think if they were going into this next season with an Alex Smith or Kyle Allen or whoever the other quarterback would be, I don't think that the optimism would be as high as it is for Curtis Samuel right now. But when you do have Ryan Fitzpatrick, who literally just does not care at this point of his career, is going to just send it all over the field, that's where the excitement comes in. That's where the passion for Curtis Samuel does come into play, and especially, too, when you factor in the amount of money that he got. So I'm definitely taking that into account, but yet at the same time, in Tags' defense, we do have to pump the brakes here and say, we can't let Curtis Samuel climb higher than wide receiver 30, in my opinion. That's kind of where I'm going to try to keep him. Again, I'll do my projections, I'll run through, and I'll see where he lands and ends up. But yet, I'm not going to let him get past that point, I think, because going past that is putting a little bit too much faith in the offensive coordinator, the head coach, and then Ryan Fitzpatrick as well. So I'm going to see where exactly he lands, but I am tempering my expectations with Curtis Samuel. But yet, at the same time, I'm not going to completely write him off. I am excited, at least, to see what Ryan Fitzpatrick can do with him.
Well, if he's going to be around 30, he's actually going to be, ironically, right around Will Fuller in terms of ECR right now. So, Will Fuller or Curtis Samuel, who's in a better position right now, fantasy-wise?
I would rather have Curtis Samuel.
Tags, do you agree with that, or are you going the Will Fuller side?
Ooh, oh, that's close.
I know I am rocking. No, that's good questions today. Oh, yeah.
I'll probably go with Fuller.
When you get frustrated, I get happy.
I think I'd go with Fuller because I'd have a better opportunity at week winning performances, whereas Samuel, he's the clear number 2 behind Terry McLaurin.
I think that's a good evaluation.
That defense is so damn good in Washington, and they're only getting better. I think I have to go with Will Fuller. They're close though. I think Samuel, I'd have him right in that low end wide receiver 3, high end wide receiver 4 territory, and Fuller is like a low end 3 for me. So I guess I'll go with Fuller.
All right, let's talk about the running backs here. Let's talk about Kenyan Drake, who has moved on to the Raiders. Fascinating here. I don't know if anybody was quite prepared for this one. I don't know if Josh Jacobs is prepared for this either. This is gross. I think everybody just saw this and everyone's shaking their head right now. And this is why you watch us on the YouTube channel, just in case you don't, because you got to get these reactions. You got to see the laughter. You got to feel the show. Okay, this is what you got to do. Subscribe to the YouTube channel of Fantasy Pros, and then you can, listening to the podcast is great. Watching the podcast, that's the next level. That's where you want to get to in your game. But the Kenyan Drake signing here, Tags, let's start with you with this one, because I don't know. This basically just kind of killed two running backs at one time, I feel like. Is it just as simple as that?
It didn't kill them. I do believe that they're both going to have fantasy viability, but you're removing the upside of both of them. Like Josh Jacobs was someone that after his rookie year, you kind of wondered, like, why wasn't this guy used more in the passing game? And then you hear Mike Mayock come out, their GM, and say, hey, we're going to use him more in the passing game. But then everything that they do, like signing Theo Riddick to a contract, re-signing Jalen Richard, drafting Lynn Bowden, and it's like all of a sudden it's like, well, this is kind of contradicting what you were talking about.
Right.
You draft a bunch of pass catchers too. And it's like, okay, well, Lynn Bowden didn't work like we wanted to. We're going to trade him away for pennies in the dollar. Let's do that. And basically the Raiders, Greg Olsen and John Gruden, they're not utilizing players to their strengths. And I don't know what the hell they're doing there, because they do have some talented football players. Josh Jacobs is a fantastic receiver. I think he's actually a decent two-down running back, but I think that his biggest strength, me watching him out of Alabama, I loved him as a receiver. And they don't utilize him that way. And now it's like you bring in Kenyan Drake, someone who basically these two were doppelgangers in 2020. They both were pretty terrible on a yards per carry basis compared to their career averages. They both weren't utilized heavily in the passing game. They both scored double-digit rushing touchdowns, which is not something that anybody coming into the year would have expected. But now you put him in the same backfield. And by the way, they re-signed Theo Riddick. They still have Jalen Richard on the roster. So it's like I started.
Have they checked the limits on the roster? Because it sounds like a lot of guys right now.
That's
just throwing that out there.
They're cutting guys. They're cutting their entire offensive line, so they have room for guys.
Right. Because who needs an offensive line when you have all those running backs, right?
And that's the next issue, is that like legit 60% of their starters in the offensive line are gone, and they were all good players. And I don't know what they're doing there with the Raiders right now, because it's just mind-blowing. But in either way, Josh Jacobs falls back. He's still going to be the best bet here, but he's going to fall back to low-end RB2 territory for me. Is like I would be torn between someone like him and David Montgomery, because Montgomery's going to split some work with Tariq Cohen now that he's back. But that offensive line is going to trend downhill. You had him average 3.9 yards per carry behind a decent offensive line last year. Kenyan Drake, he's probably better in a timeshare, to be honest with you. But you don't sign him to that contract and not give him at least 10 to 12 touches per game. So again, Jacobs is like, to me, a low end RB2, and Drake is going to be like that kind of guy that you could use as a flex play, but it's not pretty.
That's my concern, is the contract. You look at the contract, you go, okay, this is not a backup guy. This is a contract that's substantial enough to make you concerned.
Yeah.
Jacobs lost a full yard year over year in his yards per carry. Is this the motive? Let me kind of turn this around a little bit. Yes, do you think this is like a motivational factor here with Jacobs? It's like, hey, this is year 3 in the NFL. We brought in this other guy. Can you make an argument or a case for the narrative of, well, all of a sudden, both of these running backs have been devalued on the board? I think we can all agree on that. There's been a little bit of a devaluation because they're both there now. But at the same time, does this become an opportunity, whereas if the fire does get lit under Josh Jacobs, that he could still potentially pull away because of the age and because of a lot of things that Tags has said about him in the past? It's like he has all of the pieces and the talent to do that. The question is, does it become an interesting fantasy purchase time because you're getting him low?
I do think that Jacobs is going to be the guy that I want to bet on in this backfield, but as far as the fantasy value, no, because he still has to get the receiving work. And the way that they have classified and kind of like tried to defend the Kenyan Drake signing here is that they're going to use him as a joker in this offense. They're going to move him all around the formation, get him the ball. They're going to line him out in the slot. They're going to move him all around the formation and get him the ball. That's what they say. But so again, I do agree with Tags that I think that he can be that guy that you can plug in as a flex option. Based on the money that they gave him, they're going to use him. They clearly have a plan for him. But when you look at Josh Jacobs specifically, it's all going to come down to, as we've said for how many years now, that it's all going to come down to the receiving work. And I just don't see that happening now with Kenyan Drake. And then when you take into account that the offensive line was the literal strength of this team. They had needs all over the defense that they needed to address, but the offensive line finally was playing at a high level where it protected Derek Carr. which kept the offense afloat. Derek Carr needs a stout offensive line in front of him. And that also helps Josh Jacobs. We can't pretend that it doesn't. So this is a gross situation. I don't understand what they're doing. I don't think that Josh Jacobs is going to be a value because people who have, will tune into playing fantasy football in August, right before their draft, 2 weeks before their draft or whatever, they're going to see the name Josh Jacobs and they're going to say, oh yeah, he's really good. I've drafted him highly before or whatever. I don't think that he's going to fall in ADP to the point where I would be willing to pull the trigger, and that would be as a low-end RB2, high-end RB3. That's just not going to happen.
All right, one more running back to talk about who ended up staying put. But before we do, I want to recognize another sponsor of the show today, pristineauction.com. They've got daily auctions ending nightly with hundreds of incredible products out there. We're talking about memorabilia. We're talking about everything from comic books to autograph balls to helmets to anything you could possibly want for your man cave or your lady cave. That's right. I mean, there's a lot of things out there for everybody. So if you're looking to kind of redo the bar area in your house or just want to pick up something really cool to show off in front of your friends, and Pristine Auction is the place to do it. Everything there is authentic. It comes with all of the certificates, guaranteed. Things are affordable too. Not everything is thousands of dollars. There's a lot of cool stuff on there for just 10, 15 bucks you can pick up. And basically, it's out there for you. You just got to get involved in the bidding process. So what you do is you go to pristineauction.com today and put in the code FANTASYPROS. It's all one word in the registration field, FantasyPros, and you get a $5 credit right off the bat. So there you go. Free money for you just for signing up and using the code FANTASYPROS. So go do that today and sign up at pristineauction.com. Again, that's PRISTINE auction.com. Fantastic stuff there. Again, everything from Marvel stuff to wrestling stuff to sports memorabilia. It is all there and more. So go check out pristineauction.com. And one more running back to get to here. And it feels like a win for the Seahawks, but I don't know how big of a win it is that Chris Carson's coming back. Yates, let's talk about this. Did the Seahawks just kind of panic here and just kind of go backwards just because of the options that were out there? Or do you think that ideally this is just the best fit and everybody just kind of needs to shake off 2020 and kind of, I don't want to say collapse, but let's say collapse of the Seahawks, because that's kind of what it felt like towards the end, and just kind of reassert themselves, reset, and go back out, because continuity is very underrated and very important in the NFL, and the Seahawks just kept some continuity with bringing Chris Carson back.
I did not see this signing coming. I thought that Chris Carson was definitely out of town. So for him to come back, it definitely is at this point for the Seahawks. We know Chris Carson. We know what he can do. We don't want to have to, they have a total of 3 picks in the 2021 NFL draft and not a whole lot of cap space to be able to work with here in free agency to look at the available options. I mean, you're looking at Leonard Fournette, Todd Gurley, like James Conner. Like at that point, Chris Carson is your clear answer. So bring Chris Carson back. You do give him a little bit more money than I thought you were going to give him, but yet only $5.5 million guaranteed, so they could get out of it next year. Regardless, I think Chris Carson heading into, if the situation stays as it is, Chris Carson is going to be a value in fantasy football next year because he's going to get the workload. They're just going to run him into the ground. Yes, you'll see DJ Dallas factor in slightly. You'll see Rashad Penny maybe factor in slightly, but Chris Carson's going to get a ton of work. The question becomes, and this is something that we'll have to monitor as we move throughout the offseason, is the door closed officially on Russell Wilson leaving Seattle? I don't think that it is. And this is not, I don't know if he ends up in Chicago or wherever he's going to end up. I don't think that door is closed based on everything that we're hearing from guys like Adam Schefter. And so I think that there is some risk if you are, looking ahead, if your league for some reason, a keeper league or whatever, if you are looking at Chris Carson right now, I'd be a little bit hesitant to definitively say this is going to be his 2021 outlook, just because I think that there is the potential that this situation changes drastically. If Russell Wilson is not the quarterback there next year, I'm going to be very, very hesitant to look Chris Carson's way in fantasy.
It's a great perspective there, too, talking about the keeper aspect, because right now I'm sure a lot of teams are looking at Chris Carson as a potential keeper. And, in those keeper redraft leagues there, Tags, how do you see the value of Chris Carson returning to the Seahawks? Do you have that same fear that, maybe the Russell Wilson thing isn't completely settled yet? Maybe there is some more maneuverability that we don't know about. But is Carson, let's say, if Wilson's there and everything comes back, is his value still in a good place for you to make an investment this year?
I mean, I think Russell Wilson's going to be there. basically when you have a team as desperate as the Chicago Bears are to search for a quarterback, and apparently they made a very, very, very aggressive offer to get Russell Wilson, and Pete Carroll basically just said, no, I'm not going to do it. And if he's saying that now, I don't think that changes by the time the draft rolls around. I mean, the combine was a chance to try and meet a bunch of people, but now with the combine gone, all of a sudden it's like you have to go to pro days and try and fit in interviews and things like that. I don't know if they're going to find time to find a quarterback to fill in there. So I don't know if I see Russell Wilson staying there. That's basically what it comes down to. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish the Bears did get him. But at the same time, Russell Wilson being there is very, very good for Chris Carson. Russell Wilson opens lanes. You know, they obviously just traded for one of the Raiders' offensive line we were just talking about to improve their offensive line situation. So they want to run the ball. The question is, can their defense afford them to do that? But Chris Carson is still their primary receiving back. So I agree with a lot with what Yates said. I think Chris Carson's going to turn out to be a tremendous value in fantasy drafts. And knowing that, and I did read something in regards to the structure of that contract that they can get rid of after a year, basically. They can use him and abuse him. Basically, it's also him knowing that he can make tons of money again when the salary cap goes back up. So I'd say a mid to high end RB2 is where Chris Carson probably should fall.
All right, let's play a game around the room again. Chris Carson or J.K. Dobbins for you, Tags, and then Yates,
Carson.
you can answer next. Carson for you. How about you, Yates? J.K. Dobbins or Chris Carson?
I'll go Carson right now. Oh, man, but I really like Dobbins next year. That's close.
I would lean towards Dobbins. I'm just a little worried about Carson holding up to the pounding that you guys are talking about. I just don't know if that is, to me, the unknown aspect of it where it comes to Chris Carson. Where
But Dobbins' lack of usage in the passing game reminds me a lot of Josh Jacobs, and it's even worse than Josh Jacobs in a lot of ways.
It absolutely is. You're 100% right, but I feel like they make up for it with the volume of running the football in the offense just a tad.
It's going to come down to the volume with Chris Carson versus the efficiency with J.K. Dobbins.
Right.
Dobbins doesn't get a ton of work, but he's going to be incredibly efficient with his opportunity, and he'll score touchdowns. Carson, if Russell Wilson isn't there, he might still get a ton of work. But
if Russell Wilson's gone, all bets are off with this one. I'm not drafting Chris Carson there then.
Well, all right. Here's two more running backs. Yates, we'll start with you with this one. How about James Robinson or Chris Carson?
I'll go Robinson there right now.
Okay. Tags, do you agree?
Oh, that one's super close. I'm going to wait to see what the Jags do in the draft because I don't even know if they're done with the running back position yet, to be honest.
Let's say they don't draft. Let's say all the death
it's just
him and Hyde and Carlos Hyde. You think it's all right?
I'll probably take Robinson because he's going to be locked in. Yeah.
Your favorite guy, David Montgomery or Chris Carson?
Carson.
Yates?
I'll go Carson there.
All right. So, I mean, these are very close. So this is exactly where they are in terms of ECR, and you can check this out over at fantasypros.com, obviously, and you'll get the rankings there. All right, let's move on to the winners and losers. And you know what? Before we even do that, let's go with these guys. Give me from fantasy value perspective, win, lose, or push. Kenny Golladay, let's go around the room. Tags, win, lose, or push on his value with the signing with the Giants.
Fantasy value, it's a lose.
It's a lose. Yates?
Well, hold on a second. Hold on. This is a loaded question, though, because is it a lose from where he was at with Matthew Stafford or where he was going to be with Jared? No. Or was it
Jared Goff?
Jared Goff? Because if he was still with Detroit, it would be with Jared Goff. So it'd be a push, I think, actually.
Well, I'm going to live in the actuality of, he's never going to play with Jared Goff.
From how he was valued last year.
Let's say last year.
I'll say down.
Instead of theoretically how he was valued for a few weeks, let's say how he was actually valued at the end of last year with Stafford till now. Because I think that's it. We can't even throw out the hypothetical Jared Goff because we're never going to see it happen. Yep. Yates, for you, win, lose, or push?
If it's from the end of the 2021 season, that's a lose.
Okay, then let's move on to the next one here. JuJu Smith-Schuster. I assume everyone's going to say push, but I don't want to speak for everyone. Is it just a push?
I think it's a gain for him to me. Like I say that because as the season went on, you saw him getting better and better in the statistical categories because teams started respecting the perimeter players and it allowed him to do his thing underneath. So I think this is actually the best thing for his value.
Do you think it's a small win too, Yates?
I think it's a lose. When you factor in the potential that they're going to not be throwing the ball as much, then there's less opportunity there for JuJu. So I actually say it's a lose.
Interesting. All right, let's move on to Curtis Samuel. Win, lose, or push? Yates?
Win because he's now the number 2 option in that offense versus the number 3 in Carolina with a quarterback who just does not care. So I will go win there.
Tags, Come on.
Well,
Win, lose, or push.
From where he finished, I think he was right around wide receiver 30, so it's close to a push for me. But he's going to get more targets. That's what's going to make it a push, not so much efficiency. Oh man, I'll say push.
You okay there?
I'm choking.
He gets very emotional when he talks about these guys.
I do.
It's a lot.
I'm going to say push from a fantasy value perspective, even though he's going to get more volume.
All right. How about then Will Fuller? Is that a everybody loss? Obviously, I mean, when you go from Deshaun Watson to anybody else, that's an obvious loss. Kenyan Drake is a loss too because he's no longer the number one, right? We all agree on that one. And then Chris Carson is push, I think, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the same old situation. So that's an interesting spot, and just to kind of run through those big time players. And if you missed any of the guys who we've already signed, last week, you could always go back on demand and listen to any of our shows there where we broke down all of those signings, including owing back all the way to, guys like Aaron Jones. Remember when he stayed put? That's how long we've been talking about this stuff. And finally, we have the rest of these guys pretty much where they are. Let's talk more winners and losers and individuals. So I want to start here in terms of some of the individual fantasy value winners after free agency. Yates, let's start with you and talk about Cam Newton. I think he's on our list of potential winners. And is this just because the bar is set so low, or because he actually is a winner? Because, these are good enough pieces, and Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, and having the 2 tight end sets and how clever and creative they can get with that potentially, that this is something that really does kind of give Cam Newton almost like a second life? Or is that just a happy, fun narrative and it's all going to come crashing down?
It is more so because the bar was so freaking low that it can't go anywhere but up as far as the weapons that they have surrounded Cam Newton with. Now, I included him in this list, and it's saying like this is relative because we have to get through the NFL draft. I'm still not convinced that New England doesn't take a quarterback there at 15 or potentially even trade up. So I want to get through the NFL draft before I officially say that Cam Newton, clearly was a winner through free agency, but yet based on where the situation was heading, 2 weeks ago or whatever. Yeah, Cam Newton, they're surrounding him with weapons, so he has to be considered here.
Tags, is Cam Newton a winner for you as well?
Oh yeah, he is, and I think even if they draft a quarterback, he's a starter. They paid him $17 million. That's starter money. And I mean, if it was like right around the $8 million territory, I'd be like, all right, I think it's up for debate. But you don't pay him $17 million to just sit on the bench. Cam Newton's not going to do that. Cam Newton, I promise you, Cam Newton doesn't sign that contract without being guaranteed the starter, essentially, because he's been open about that. He will not compete for a starting job, that he deserves it. And I think it's a bunch of crap. You should always be competing for that job. But he said openly himself that he is not going to accept a backup job anywhere.
Yates?
I was just going to add, I think with Newton, it was like a $5.1 million base, and then he has escalators to get up to, I can't remember what it was. But it's not that big. It's like a base salary of $5.1 million, and then if he plays well, he gets more money.
I think there's a good chance the Patriots find a way to get a quarterback in the draft early. I think they're going to either get clever, move up, or maybe just take advantage of someone falling that, and it could even be a Mac Jones or somebody like that, and I don't know. We'll see if that turns out to be the right guy for them. It might very well be. Good decision maker. The Jets quarterback may or may not be Sam Darnold, but whoever it is, Tags, is that a winner for you?
The Jets quarterback?
Yes.
Oh, it's definitely a win for them, whoever it is. This team is... there's so many changes. It was so tough writing up a Corey Davis article without knowing who the quarterback is. It's like the same thing with Keelan Cole. I absolutely love what the Jets have done in free agency. In fact, they're my biggest winner from free agency. I love what they've done. But at the same time, you have to wonder, like, if you're a Jets fan, I personally would be rooting for them to trade out of that number 2 pick. Like, if they had number 1, I'd be like, okay, trade Sam Darnold. I'm okay. Like, because behind Trevor Lawrence, I'm unwilling to say that any of them cannot miss prospects. I don't think there's really such a thing, but if there was such a thing as Trevor Lawrence, but I would look to collect, because you can get a king's ransom for that pick. And then basically keep building your roster. You know that this team has a lot of needs other than quarterback, and you shouldn't even close the door on Sam Darnold yet, because, well, we've seen a lot of other players come out from Adam Gase. So I love it. I do. I think that the team did a lot of good things in free agency, and if they continue to do that in the draft, this franchise can be rebuilt very quickly.
Tags and I have talked at length in the last show about the Jets offseason in general and how it's really, from the head coaching hire all the way down to some of these signings. Yates, are you kind of in that same sort of simpatico fashion where you look at what the Jets have done and think, hey, this has been a really good offseason and they are a winner here after free agency?
Absolutely. I mean, based on, I wrote down the Jets quarterback because it's whoever it is. If it's Sam Darnold, if it's a Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, whichever one of those quarterbacks it's going to be, they're walking into a much better situation than what was on this roster just 2 weeks ago. So Corey Davis, Keelan Cole, love the signings there, adding them to this wide receiver room to go with Denzel Mims, and let's see if they hold on to Jamison Crowder. But the Jets stayed measured. They didn't, go out and chase after every free agent that has a heartbeat like New England, and they stayed measured and brought in some talented players there.
You have to cast a wide net sometimes, I mean, come on, Bill Belichick was single last year. Things didn't work out. He was home. He didn't get to go out. He's used to being out there in January and February and still playing. He was home alone with his dog, and he said, not me, and he went out there and he just started swiping right on every player that was possibly available there. Let's talk about Daniel Jones too, the other quarterback in New York, at least for now. Yates, is he a winner here? Because theoretically, a healthy Saquon Barkley, you bring in a big-time guy with the potential of Kenny Golladay, and you've already got some pretty good pieces around them, and I thought they did a good job year over year last season of kind of improving that offensive line. Still things to be done, but overall, it seems like Joe Judge has kind of gotten through these guys. The Giants were a very competitive team last year. They were a team that kind of were their own worst enemies sometimes at certain moments, especially late in games. They kind of gave away a lot of games. So do you think this is a win this offseason for Daniel Jones's value?
Yeah, we talked about it with Kenny Golladay. Daniel Jones, they're doing everything they can to set him up to succeed. And so, again, now it's all about him. It's very similar to a Cam Newton. Can you take this situation that you've now been handed and capitalize on it? And so Daniel Jones definitely is a winner based on every move that they have made here in free agency. So now we'll see. Can he take that next step forward?
Tags, is it fair now to say that if Daniel Jones fails in this setting, that the Giants are absolutely 100% moving on, good place to, they've exhausted all the potential? Because it feels like that's what they're doing. They're saying, look, you know what? Let's give him everything we possibly can. Let's put all of our cards on the table. And if it fails, then we can move on and even bring in who knows, maybe another veteran or somebody like that to step in on a shorter term situation and make them a competitive team.
That feels like it's exactly what they're doing. I mean, I would argue that he already had a lot of weapons, but there were some injuries that obviously took place last year. So it was a weird season. So, yeah, I mean, this is where it's like, there's some people that are suggesting that the Giants still take an offensive skill player at the top of the draft with that number 11 pick. It's possible. I don't see it. I think that they have too many needs, but it's basically, if they stick to the whole idea that you should be drafting best player available, I think reaching on an edge at that point is what else they need. It's almost like, is it worth doing it? So they might. It's possible, but yeah, he's got, I mean, if you, from top to bottom, when it comes to, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, he's got one of the most talented skill receiving groups.
All right, those are the winners. Let's talk about some of the losers here. Tags, Jared Goff. He doesn't have Kenny Golladay. He doesn't have Marvin Jones. He doesn't have much. And now he's in Detroit. So, Tags, is that a huge L here for Jared Goff this offseason?
Losing Sean McVay was already the beginning to that process of being an L, but now you take away Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay, and then you replace them with Tyrell Williams and Brashad Perriman on one-year deals. I don't know where else to go from this one, guys. I mean, Tyrell Williams, at least he does have some experience in Anthony Lynn's offense. I guess that's what you can go back on. I don't really know where else to go. But these two receivers they don't fit Jared Goff's skill set. I really don't understand it. I don't know what they're doing there, but hey, at least they're not the Texans. I guess that's you got.
You know what, man? They're getting closer every day. Yeah, they're not the mess that they are the Texans, but. I feel so bad. I know so many Lions fans and they love that team and they support them, but I feel like it's doomed before it starts even here with Jared Goff. Yates, do you kind of get that feeling already?
Absolutely. This is just a terrible situation for Jared Goff to go from Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and now you're going to Tyrell Williams and Brashad Perriman and Quintez Cephas. It's not pretty.
All right, let's talk about some more losers. Hunter Henry, is he a loser, Yates? Because he kind of controlled his own path to winning or losing, and he made this choice. So, did he make this choice knowing that he could still win, in the sense that, there were going to be it was going to be a role carved out for him in this offense? And do you think that at this point he is even is he a tight end one still on that fringe for you, or no? He's like off there completely.
No, he's nowhere near it for me. And I mean, this is a loser in the sense of fantasy value, right? And again, we talk about it all the time. NFL players do not care about your fantasy teams. So Hunter Henry, he's going to go where he can get paid and where he can buy into the culture and the best fit for him. And so I completely support him signing in New England, especially for the money that they gave him. But when we're talking about him as far as a loser here from a fantasy value perspective, it's all about that he could have signed somewhere else. He could have been that guaranteed tight end one in this offense and just soaked up targets again. But going from Justin Herbert as the quarterback there and that guaranteed locked in tight end one to now the tight end two with Cam Newton as your quarterback in a primarily run heavy offense, you can't but look at Hunter Henry and say that he lost in free agency from a fantasy perspective.
Tags, are you surprised that the ego of players sometimes allows this to happen? Yes, I understand you're looking for where you can get paid, and you would imagine the ego of a player who's as good as Hunter Henry wants to be in a place where he is going to catch a fair amount of balls. So is this just a matter of going to the culture? Because the culture's not the same without Tom Brady there. So it's kind of a puzzling move. I think everybody was, so automatically it's like that meme of the guy's face that's very excited and the next one he's really bummed out. I feel like that was everybody with the JuJu Smith signing for the most part. And then but Hunter Henry kind of controlled his own destiny here. So does he know something we don't? Or is this just like,
no, I don't
too simple?
I don't even want to call it ego, though, because I feel like part of it has to come down to understanding who you are and what you could bring to a team. I don't think anyone would ever mistake Hunter Henry as a top 5 tight end in the NFL.
That's fair.
I wouldn't.
I wouldn't either.
From a talent standpoint, JuJu Smith can be one of those guys.
I agree.
But this is about taking care of him and his family. Like it doesn't, like, this could be the last big contract he gets. If he gets hurt, 6 weeks through the season and all of a sudden it's like, he has an Achilles injury that he can't come back from, he would regret not taking that money from a team that was willing to offer him. And honestly, the Patriots had the money to pay him. So he got paid.
Right.
I understand that, but I think Hunter Henry also accepts the fact that he's not George Kittle. He's not Travis Kelce. He's never going to put up the numbers that those guys do. He doesn't necessarily need that opportunity. It's more like, hey, I've made a living with Phillip Rivers and Justin Herbert. I don't want to ruin that value. I'm going to cash in while I can. And I think he was smart to do so because I don't think Hunter Henry, I don't even think I'd put him as a top 10 tight end in the NFL in terms from a pure talent standpoint if they were all in the same exact situation. So I don't think it's necessarily ego. I think it's more about like understanding what you are and what you aren't and getting the most of your situation, because bringing this to like a fantasy perspective, like me, for instance, like I used to work for PFF and then FantasyPros came around. One of the biggest selling things of joining FantasyPros to me was that it was a site that a lot of my stuff was going to be available to read for everybody. I wanted the opportunity to expand to that bigger audience where it's like, you may have been able to make more money somewhere else, but it's going to be behind a paywall or something like that. So it was just, there's definitely pros and cons to every situation. And you have to understand what's best for you and your family and be realistic about it.
That is a really interesting way of putting it there. Tell me, Josh Jacobs, is he the third loser here, Tags, for you? Because we talked about...
Yeah.
It's just... Again, I hate lazy fantasy because sometimes it's very lazy. And I have an interesting dynasty question for Yates coming up next. But I want to ask you first about the redraft value of Josh Jacobs because we already kind of put him in his spot here. But overall, it's just the presence of Kenyan Drake enough there that's going to kind of shy you off of him in fantasy in 21.
No, it's definitely going to shy me off of him, especially if, as Yates mentioned, if his value doesn't come down as much by those casual fans that don't follow as much, all the time. They're like, oh, Josh Jacobs, they drafted him with a high pick. They're never going to put Kenyan Drake in there over him. Kenyan Drake sucked last year, blah, blah, but they're going to keep drafting him as probably a top 15 running back, which I'm not willing to do. I wasn't even willing to do that before they signed Kenyan Drake. Right. So I think the biggest loser, though, that I wanted to mention in this segment was AJ Dillon. Because nobody wants to talk about it because it's almost like
that was one for me. To me, he was the biggest loser of all of the running backs I could possibly think of.
It's almost like you feel like you're like, all right, well, did it feel like free agency? Because it almost didn't, right? Because it happened like the day before or whatever it was where Aaron Jones re-signed with the Packers. So it's apparently other teams were willing to come with more money, but he said, I want to stay a Packer. And AJ Dillon was a guy that was getting hype in the fantasy community to be like a borderline RB1.
He looked great in the playoffs. He looked tremendous. He was carrying guys for 5-6 yards at a time. Yeah. And with you wouldn't think that Aaron Jones would be coming back and that's what they would do, but that's exactly what happened. But I'm with you. I'm actually, Dillon to me is actually the biggest loser of all these guys because I think he had the most. Hunter Henry, like you already said, wasn't necessarily a top 5 tight end for you anyway. Right. Josh Jacobs, obviously a good running back. That's something we could talk about on the side. Jared Goff, nobody would confuse him necessarily with a elite quarterback at this stage in his career. But Dillon in that offense had potential to be at least a low-end RB1 if everything broke right. Yates, I want to ask you a moment, and maybe you can put this more in the keeper realm of discussions too and kind of crack open the dynasty brain for a moment also, because I know we're talking redraft here, but in the keeper leagues, is this a fascinating opportunity to buy on Josh Jacobs where people are panicking because they see Kenyan Drake coming there. And I think you could also look at the Kenyan Drake edition and look at the body of work of Kenyan Drake and say, well, he's had a ton of injuries. He was in a walking boot to start the year last year. He has had numerous opportunities and never quite cemented himself as the number one. And I'm sure there's a sour taste in the mouths this season for everybody who was super high, who drafted Josh Jacobs a couple years ago, kept him year over year, and saw maybe a flat line year over year at best, if not maybe slight regression. So is this the perfect time to buy on somebody like Josh Jacobs in that keeper scenario?
I don't think that now is the perfect time. I think that you wait until week 3 of the NFL season and you see his stats and then you buy, because I don't think that he's going to have a very good season this next year. And I think that his value is only going to decrease as we get further into the off season. So yeah, I think that you can eventually buy Josh Jacobs, because it's not, potentially looking forward to when he leaves in free agency a year or two down the road, if they don't pick up the 5th-year option or whatever. But as of right now, I think that you still wait, because I think his value is just going to continue to decrease.
All right, so our 3 big winners were Daniel Jones, the Jets quarterback in quotes, because we're not sure who it is going to be, and Cam Newton. So those are 3 quarterbacks that were winning. The losers, Jared Goff, Hunter Henry, and Josh Jacobs so far, and A.J. Dillon you could throw into that mix as well. Let's talk from a team perspective too, because I always feel like the most under-discussed thing that we could talk about is, not enough people in fantasy talk about, is the overall aspect of teams and how that affects fantasy. In terms of the winners this offseason, we already talked about the Jets quite a bit, so we already know they've done a very good job. How about Washington? Yates, from the standpoint of what they've done so far this offseason, adding Fitzpatrick, overall that's going to have probably a positive effect on not just the running backs, but McLaurin as well, and now hopefully Samuel. So are the Washington football team another one of the big winners, you would say, this offseason besides the Jets?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the moves that they've made, especially when you factor in William Jackson, too, on the back end, signing him as a corner there out of Cincy. So, yeah, I definitely love the moves that they've made. They've stayed measured. They went after the guys that they wanted to. They brought them in to improve this team. But I think that this was, granted it was the NFC East, but this was a playoff team last year. And they, took Tampa Bay. They gave them everything that they got. So I think that this is going to be a team that we need to watch out for next season.
How about the Bengals? Tags is another team too. Is this a good free agent period for them also?
I love what they did, because they're a team that, on a rookie contract like Joe Burrow, you have a chance to win. Like, it's the chance to do things with your roster that you wouldn't traditionally be able to do when you have a quarterback that's getting paid $40 million a year like a Dak Prescott. But signing Riley Reif in free agency, that was big to start to basically, you have a tackle to put opposite Jonah Williams and solidify that offensive line a little bit. You could still add on the interior, but you don't have to spend a high pick to get one. Your corners are fine. And that way, so when it comes to it, you can draft a guard or two in the middle rounds. And then you look at the defense. Larry Ogunjobi, he's been kind of like, he hasn't been consistent, but there's been flashes of what can be a great player. Trey Hendrickson had a great year in 2020. Was it a fluke? We don't know, but his contract is only really for 1 year. It's guaranteed money for 1 year, and then they can extend that, obviously pay him out longer if they want to. Replacing William Jackson was going to be tough, but Chidobe Awuzie and Mike Hilton, those are 2 solid signings. I think they're good signings, but what it does, it allows them to be flexible when it comes to the draft, take best player available, because they don't need to grab a tackle at number 5. Now, the question is, it blows my mind, and it kind of was swept under the rug. I'm a little worried about the value of T. Higgins right now, not because he's not a fantastic football player, but Joe, you and I have talked about the ceiling of him in 2021, but they were in on Kenny Golladay. They were reportedly offering him a 1-year deal, which tells me they may be looking at a wide receiver at that number 5 pick, or I've been saying all along, I think Kyle Pitts is someone that you should look to at number 5 for them, because if they get a game-changing tight end in there to pair with Higgins and Boyd, it would make a big difference.
To me, that's the move. That is the move, and I think at the very least they were kicking the tires on Golladay, probably because Golladay had just hung out there so long that they probably said to themselves, well, why not? Let's try, because then we could take that high pick and use it on a lineman instead, which is, I think, might even be a better investment too, to protect the asset of Joe Burrow going forward. So I think it gave them outs. And I think you tried, and the longer he lingered, he said, hey, might as well get in this dance and see what happens. It failed. Okay, now you pivot to plan B, which is, like you said, maybe it's a Pitts, maybe it's an offensive lineman. You figure that out. Also, I think the Jaguars, I want to put them as a winner too, because I like that they brought in a lot of NFL players. And I'm saying that, haha joke, but like they brought in guys that have been around the league for a while, and I think that's important too, because you have a coach who hasn't been in the NFL before. And I think that is very important to kind of surround, they've got a lot of picks, the Jaguars too, and you want to surround some of these young guys, especially the young quarterback, with guys who have been around the league, veterans that you can count on, whether it be guys like Hyde or some of the other moves that they've made there. So, Yates, would you also say that the Jaguars were a team that came out of free agency with at least a lot of depth at the very least? Because this is a roster, let's face it, that kind of needed that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their roster, they have holes all over it. So, yeah, I think, day one passed by and they didn't do a ton in free agency there, but day two, they came out swinging and added some really solid players just across the board, which is what you need to do. In free agency, you fill holes, and then in your draft, you set yourself up to be able to draft the best player available and bring in talented players into the building. So, Jacksonville has got a ton of draft picks, like you mentioned there, Joe. So I think that it kind of frees them up to just go whichever way that they need to.
And I want to add on to that the Broncos are a team that also should get a lot of respect for what they've done in free agency. In terms like getting Darby, getting Kyle Fuller, those are two cornerbacks that were like two of the top cornerbacks in the market. They made it happen with Fuller like immediately, which they solidified the main need. Everybody talked about number 9. They're going to be taking a cornerback. They're going to take a corner. Now all of a sudden, Caleb Farley is a guy that is dealing with a back issue. He had to have back surgery. So it's like, is he falling out of round 1 now? He's definitely going to fall in the draft a little bit because of that. And it's like the Broncos have solidified that need. Justin Simmons worked out a long-term contract with him. We just found out that Kareem Jackson, they released him, didn't pick up an option, but they were able to re-sign him. So it's like this team has all of a sudden, they've retained the players they wanted to on defense, or they've built, they've grabbed the cornerbacks that they needed to in free agency. And now it's like one of the biggest losers in free agency, I kid you not, is Drew Lock, because all of a sudden this team could go in so many different situations that they have the ammunition to do it, and they have that number 9 pick. So I don't know if Drew Lock's the starter in 2021.
I want to start with more losers too, and start with the Titans, because it feels like the Titans tricky. I mean, I know the draft is still to come, but from free agency at least, I think we can all agree, right, that the Titans probably came out of this as a loser.
Not great, Bob.
Yeah, when you lose Corey Davis, JuJu Smith, they cut Adoree Jackson, they cut Dennis Kelly, their starting offensive tackle. They've got needs just everywhere. Malcolm Butler also gone. Kenny Vaccaro, like. This team just has a ton of holes all over their roster now, and not necessarily a surplus of draft capital able to fill it. You sign Bud Dupree, that takes care of your opposite edge rusher, opposite of Harold Landry, but outside of that, man, you've got a ton of needs everywhere. So yeah, I'm glad that we included them here in this list.
Yeah, they're definitely on the losing end of things. The Saints, look, whenever you lose Drew Brees, you're obviously losing already, but was there more of a collective feel too? Because Tags, I feel like the Saints are a team that has continued to. They've grown and grown and grown over the years into this balloon where you're just waiting for it to pop. And you knew, they've got a lot of talent, but it's a lot of expensive talent, and it's a lot of age along with that talent. And I feel like eventually the bubble's going to burst. Was this the burst?
It was, and we knew it was coming. But it's weird seeing like all the red. So I track the depth charts as moves happen. It's like all the red, the players coming off, all the green, the players going on, and it's nothing but red. It's Drew Brees, it's Emmanuel Sanders, it's Jared Cook, Josh Hill. Jared Cook doesn't really matter that much. Sheldon Rankins, he just signed. Malcolm Brown, Trey Hendrickson, Quan Alexander, Janoris Jenkins. It's like there's just so much red here. It's like you can't expect them to be the same team, and they're not going to be the same team. We kind of knew that, but seeing all the red is definitely not a good thing.
And last but certainly not least, the Texans. I mean, this was not a good free agent period for them. I think we can all agree. And we need to kind of talk about it here, because as things are kind of progressing and more information is coming out, I mean, we don't have definitive things to go on quite yet here, but the closer we are here for everyone who has Deshaun Watson in leagues and has him as a keeper, and I think we've got to discuss it at the very least. Yates, what is your feeling right now if you are somebody that has rostered Deshaun Watson? Are you feeling like are you making plans already to have another quarterback in 21 potentially?
I'll say this with Deshaun Watson, that I am not going to make like a definitive statement or provide my analysis on anything until we have all the facts.
That's fair.
I'm not going to come down on one side of the argument or the other until we have all the facts. And, I'm going to let the justice system take its place and have its effect and everything like that. But as far as from a fantasy football analysis and what I am paid to do, right? Analyze fantasy football.
That's all I'm asking you. Because I think what we want to do is we want to get people prepared of like, hey, you know what? With the trend of what we've seen in recent years, it might be smart to be proactive instead of reactive to this.
What I'm going to say is that I'm holding. This is a complete hold one way or the other, because if you are going to sell Deshaun Watson especially let's talk about it from a dynasty perspective. If you are going to sell Deshaun Watson right now, you are selling at bottom value.
Absolutely.
Like everyone, people are making, trade requests. They're sending out trade offers for Deshaun Watson to see if they can get him at rock bottom value. And for me, I'm not selling at this point. I'm also not trying to go acquire him because there is the potential that this turns out to be worse than what we anticipate, and again, so I think right now it is just a complete hold. I'm just waiting until more information comes out. And then once we get that definitive information, the truth comes out, then we can analyze. This is one of the situations that I'm not going to be proactive. I'm just going to stay and just tread water right now.
Tegs, do you think it would be wise for, in those keeper leagues and things like that to at least make a plan right now as you're entering into drafts and stuff like that to, to be ready and prepared for another quarterback to be the person on your roster? Because it certainly looks like from the Texas standpoint, they're making those kind of preparations.
Well, signing Tyrod Taylor to the contract that they did it was backup money. It was high-end backup money. But then trading for Ryan Finley made little sense, but then you hear about more and more details coming out about this that I don't know if a team can even trade for Deshaun Watson right now. Even if the Texans, they've been saying all along that they're not trading him. I don't even know at this point that they'd be able to do much, honestly. Like if I'm an NFL franchise, I can't trade for him right now. There's just so much up in the air. So I think as a dynasty owner, a fantasy owner, whatever, you have to be prepared for those situations as well. And just kind of say, we don't even know. And I think Yates is right to say hold, because like is anything in life, you never want to sell at a floor. You never want to buy at a high. You know what I mean? Like there's certain things that you just have to accept. But this franchise, they didn't do anything to lure anybody there. That's for sure.
It has been tough. It has been really tough for Houston Texans fans, and you lose J.J. Watt on top of it all, so it hasn't been good. Let's try to leave on a fun note here, and I've got some nominees here for the worst NFL free agent signings of all time. We're putting a bow here on everything, and I've got some nominees, and I know from Yates' perspective, some of these guys you might not know as well, but I'm old enough to remember all of them because I'm old. But I'm also wise, so don't discount me completely. So Scott Mitchell, nominee number 1, 1994, signed with, of course, the Lions, and a long, long history of disappointment for the Detroit fans. He had a small window there where he looked like he could be a franchise quarterback with the Dolphins, and then they backed up the truck, and we all know that it never quite happened. We have DeMarco Murray, 2015 Eagles. DeMarco Murray coming off some really good years with the Cowboys. Obviously, at a given time, also, certainly some things that were lacking in terms of the coaching in Philadelphia during that time. I think we can kind of put that kind of gently. Amon Green, who had a very good career, but once again on the back end of 2017, signed with the Texans. Not a good signing for them. And then, of course, who can forget Albert Haynesworth, 2009, with the then Washington Redskins, now Washington football team. So, Tags, you got any of your favorites of these four? Or maybe there's another one. I thought Nnamdi Asomugha was another one, too, where I remember, oh my goodness, all the Eagles fans going crazy about that one. But free agency has been it's been fickle for Eagles fans over the years, I feel.
Haynesworth was the worst contract, and it's not even that close.
I agree. I think it's Haynesworth, too. Especially because of all the extracurricular problems that he brought after.
He was a dummy, and I'm not. I don't say that about everybody, but he was an idiot.
Just me. Yes.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Changing schemes too, like transitioning to a different scheme. He sucked in the scheme. He sucked as a person. He's just a bad dude. He's a bad dude all overall. And you gave him, how much was that? Like it was over $100 million, but I don't remember how much. Insane. I don't remember how much was guaranteed though.
Too much, I think is the answer. I don't know if any of these kind of strike for you, Yates, but you have one in the back of your head that was like, yeah, that was a bad free. Or maybe even this year, was there one that popped out where you're like, you could circle this bad boy. This is going to be a disaster when all's said and done.
Hey, I remember the DeMarco Murray. That was kind of around when I was starting to turn towards football. But Scott Mitchell in 1994, I was 0 years old, guys. So
it was 0 years old. So what? I didn't see Terry Bradshaw play, but I know who he is. No excuse. I mean, that's the silliest thing ever. I mean, you're
Are we supposed to know Scott Mitchell?
You're a student of the game. I think you are supposed to know Scott Mitchell because it's funny. I want to know Scott Mitchell. But yes, I'm 0 years old. But the DeMarco Murray one, I mean, that was certainly one that was disappointing, no doubt about that. Do you have one this year that you think was just like a bad, like, this is bad, this is going to end badly, and no one's going to be happy at the end of it?
I mean, it's all relative, but when you look at the contracts that some of these other guys got, Nelson Aguilar getting what he got on the first day of free agency compared to JuJu Smith-Schuster, Will Fuller, it's not great.
Yeah, I wonder if Bill Belichick had to do it all again. Maybe he would have laid in the weeds instead of been so aggressive. because it kind of seemed like there were some bargains out there to be had, especially with the cap changing over and, looking forward into next year. But we shall see. It all gets played out in the field at the end of the day. I want to thank all of our sponsors of today's show, including Magic Spoon. And I want to remind everybody, use the code FantasyPros to save $5 off. You go to magicspoon.com in order to get that. And, of course, I want to thank pristineauction.com as well. You can go and use the code in the registration field, FantasyPros, and get $5 off of your first, and you get a little credit there for yourself on your first bid. It's a lot of fun, a lot of great materials there. Again, that's pristineauction.com, PRISTINE auction.com. And don't forget about that giveaway thanks to Pristine Auction we've got at fantasypros.com/contest, Lamar Jackson free jersey. Go there, fantasypros.com/contest, and get that Lamar Jackson autographed jersey. It is so easy, and it's free to get involved in the drawing. That'll do it for us today, but the story of the game goes on. For Mike Tagliere and Kyle Yates, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.
Thanks for tuning in to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Fantasy Pros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.